Okay guys, this is chapter 35.3 of Age of Anxiety, the part right after World War I, and this one is Challenges to Liberal Order. So two objectives: understand the changes that occurred in Russia under Lenin, and understand the same thing for Stalin, and in particular how Stalin came to power. This one will focus on, we'll do in two parts because I don't think I can fit the whole thing into one. So 35.3, the first two objectives, and this focuses on the changes that occurred after World War I, and the implication for the title's liberal order, because remember that's where everything was going for liberal policies, liberal government policies in Europe in particular, and we talked a little bit in some of the other previous ones, in particular the backlash to liberal democracy. So here's some different ways to do government at the time. So it starts with the Bolshevik Revolution that we took a look at it back in World War I, with the Bolsheviks taking over and getting out of World War I. So the first part obviously is a joke named after the running the bulls. Yeah, you didn't read about that. You know that's not true. You know that's me pulling your leg, so wake up for that one. The October/November, remember because of the date change, Revolution in 1917 puts the Bolsheviks in power, and at that point in time they set up the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, the USSR, also what we in America call the commies, even though they're not really communists, but they try to get there. We'll see. We'll talk more about that. The Soviets take over, and they immediately disband the Constituent Assembly. That was the provisional government and the temporary Dumas and stuff like that, and they said they're going to run it differently. And then they all power to the Soviets, and the Soviets were kind of like that. My best example was like a city council that wasn't elected, but kind of more like a representative, a union for soldiers and workers, industrial workers. Only problem is there's a big group of people who aren't represented called the serfs. So anyways, they take over, and the most prominent one is going to be the Moscow one, which is going to make the main decisions for all of the nation. So before Russia can actually do anything, we're going to have a civil war. So immediately after the revolution, that's not good enough for a couple of groups, in particular lots of Western powers who want Russia back in the war to finish off the war to help them defeat Germany. And there's a little bit of concern of other things we'll get to. So 1918, 1920 is what we call the Russian Civil War. So it went from revolution, which was short, to Russian Civil War, which is going to be a little bit longer. In the Civil War, you have the Reds, the communists, and the Whites, the anti-communists. It was cool that they all, the Reds wore red and the Whites wore whites, kind of like a big football game, only with killing and lots of destruction and terrible things on each side did upon the other. So the Red Tier, okay, kind of like all terrors and revolutions, stuff like that, was to eliminate any dissent. In this case, lots of taking people who spoke out against the changes, spoke out against anything. People that were helpful for the revolution earlier now become immediate enemies of the revolution. All sorts of great stuff. People, being sent away to Siberia to essentially die out there, and full on just killing of people who may cause problems. So during that time, they even killed the royal family, the Romanovs, Nicholas II and his family and kids. And there's always this rumor that one of the daughters was not killed, that she was protected by the guard, and that's a bunch of fluff. It's not true. So there's also White Terror on the other side, the group that the communists were fighting against, called the anti-commies, who kind of a mish of loyalists or royalists, and then some of the provisional governments and the more mellow or I'm not a commie but I want some revolutionary change type of group. Okay, they did some terrible things too, so those people, the Red as well. Ultimately, the Whites are getting help from the Western powers, and even with that, it's not enough to help them win. The Whites get help from Britain and the United States, who send some minor troops who have very limited involvement in any of the fighting, but they get a lot of financial help early on. But because the Whites are not really truly organized, and the Whites have a lot of infighting, the Reds have less infighting, their Red Army is able to win. The end result is the Russian Civil War costs the lives of 10 million Russians are killed during the Civil War, and the Red Army is clearly in charge, and they now have Russia. War communism starts almost immediately within the realm of the communist takeover for a couple of reasons. One, because they needed a quick change to help alleviate the problems that they said that they were going to deal for the citizens, which was, remember, peace. Well, they signed a treaty, that kind, and now they need bread and land. Well, rapid collectivization. So what they did, instead of having anyone having land, they took all the land away, and they distributed them how they see fit, and no one would own land. It would all be run by the state. With that, there's going to be lots of confiscations, and the peasants were all for that until they found out, oh wait, they're taking even my little plot of land. Yeah, and they thought it was going to be kind of a different scale. The government saying that they need to do this because they need to take it all away so they can distribute it more equitably, not necessarily equal, but more fairly, so it would be best for the entire society. So it's like me asking you to give me your pizza so I can split it up a little bit better. Your fear is you might not get as much. You know, if you get more than you had the first time, you're happy. If you get less, you're going to be unhappy. But just the threat of giving it to me so I can split it up better would probably scare you. So kind of like that stuff. It's massively unpopular, and then Lenin backtracks almost immediately after that. Well, not immediately, but soon into it, because there's so much resistance to it. So the idea of trying to force the communism down the throat did not work, and so they alleviate some things, and they start what's called the NEP, the National Economic Policy, which allows for some small-time ownership of some of the things. The bigger businesses were run by the government, but some of the smaller things, like farmers could sell excess crops, and small-time shops that only had a couple workers, those could be run by private people. So even here, we don't have a true communism or true socialism because some are owned by private people. Okay, so the NEP does a lot to promote the increase of agriculture production, and in particular the promotion of industry. That's one of the biggest things that it's going to do. So with that, they're going to promote a lot more technology in agriculture, better seeds, better tractor, better plowing and farming, and all sorts of things to increase the yield, okay, the amount of crops they're bringing in. And in industry, big time, massive effort to bring industry to parts of the Volga River and all parts of Russia, so they could get that mass population working in factories to increase the production, because their fear is that they're going to be attacked by the West. Their fear is that they're going to be attacked by the Germans. Their fear is they're going to be attacked by British and all these people who are trying to see them stop. And then the creation of kulaks, which I misspelled here because it doesn't have a C. Here we go. Which are the funny pants that they get to wear, which is not really true because once again you didn't read about that. So the kulaks were the special peasant farmers who had more land. So the idea with the kulaks were trying to keep land and being greedy instead of sharing and working with the people. They were against the revolution. So big resentment towards them, and then kind of like persecution of them. And so the government actively made it look like the kulaks are out to stop the revolution. And so if you're a good person, you will report the kulaks, who are greedy people who aren't sharing their pizza. Okay, so the emphasis was that one step forward, one step backward, two steps forward. So because Russia was not really industrialized, remember Marx's thing and most myths, okay, Marx believed that the true revolution can only happen in an industrialized society, where Russia's not industrialized, and yet they're trying to pull this thing off. So they had the cart before the horse, so to speak. Then Lenin dies. So in 1924 he dies. He had a series of a couple strokes, and towards the last one he became kind of incapacitated, ineffective to lead because of the situation. And so then some funky things happen. Supposedly Lenin warns his group to beware of Stalin. He doesn't trust him. He thinks that guy's kind of got a dark side to him, but other people don't really listen to him. And by the time it happens, Stalin has entrenched himself into a spot where he's put people into high positions. He's a secretary, which at that point was a thankless job, and he was in charge of who would be allowed into higher positions within the group. So after Lenin's death, triumvirate starts to run the Soviet Union, excuse me. Just three guys are going to run it, but when there's three, it just doesn't work, because one is trying to eliminate the other. So Stalin and Bukharin are friends, and they work to kind of oust Trotsky and his ideas. Trotsky's kind of more of a dreamer. He believed in the permanent revolution and the idea that you got to keep doing, keep revising, keep modifying it so that it keeps working, and also ultimately keep spreading it. That's one of the things they want to do, because in the Communist Manifesto is the idea that in order for communism to truly succeed, all capitalism must be eliminated. So down below we have a picture of, from left to right, Stalin, Lenin, and Trotsky. Lenin in the middle, Stalin on the left, and that's kind of a younger version of him. Eventually Stalin's going to take over. Lenin obviously dies, and then Trotsky himself runs away because he fears Stalin, and he ends up being killed by Stalin's people in Mexico City, and that's a cool story. La Lacuna, it's a novel. You should read it. It's kind of interesting. Maybe a summertime read. So Joseph Stalin, he's got a big name, Joseph Duzgalewski, not even trying his middle name. It is Nom de Guerre. Nom de Guerre, just so you know, is his wartime nickname. So this was his nickname when he was helping to run during the revolution and during the Civil War, excuse me. And then by some of his friends, he's known as Koba. He's a Georgian from Atlanta. Obviously, I'm kidding. Georgia is an area in Russia. It's one of the provinces, and that's where he's from. So he has a different dialect than the other people. So for that, he kind of picked on. He had gone to seminary school but dropped out. He was heavily influenced by his mom. Some people say kind of a mama's boy. And then he also, by 1928, he ends up being in control of Russia all the way up until his death in 1953. And then he had some major trust issues in that he didn't trust anyone, not even his own family, and a big sense of paranoia that people are out to get them. So he's kind of like that classic prototype of a arch villain with lots of issues and the fact that they don't trust anyone. So he's kind of sets a role model for that, and that's you might see in movies. Okay. But what he does do for Russia is to get them to move very quickly at all costs, and the cost was great, what he calls the Great Leap Forward, that they need to industrialize Russia immediately and quickly and effectively. He has a big fear that Russia is going to be involved in a conflict or war, that other groups are going to come to try to stop it. He does not believe in spreading the revolution outside of Russia until Russia is much more firm and situated. Okay, whereas Trotsky and Lenin believed that there had to be more movement, more spread of communism around so that it could take hold. Okay, so socialism in one country is Stalin's idea, and that's his policy. And then the massive collectivization of agriculture. This is going to have some real bad ramifications for some people. So he believes in all the farming needs to be collected so that the government can distribute to those in need, mainly the soldiers and the people that are going to be running society, and not much left for the people, the peasants in the area, which results in our Ukrainian famine. He does not like the Ukraine. Don't know the entire details, but apparently the Ukraine was one of the groups that tried to rebel and tried to leave the Soviet Union because they wanted to do their own thing. And up until this time, the Ukraine was had more independence than other places and had a lot more wealth and affluence because they had a huge agricultural production in their area, kind of in the southern part down by the Black Sea. So they had a more milder climate, more suited for growing lots of stuff, and it wasn't freezing over the whole time. So what Stalin does is just go and take all the food from these people and then force them to, well, suffer and die. So here's a grotesque picture of bodies piled up on top of each other, and with the Eastern Orthodox crosses in the background. During this time, estimates range, and they're way, way weird from one side to the other side, from 48 million deaths in the Don region, another river area, and the dekulakization to try to eliminate the people. He kept on blaming that all this starvation stuff is happening because there's kulaks who are hoarding food and keeping it away. And the law of socialist property meant that all the property belonged to the state, so the state can distribute it what it sees best. And then he's quoted tons of quotes, but when you cut down forest, splinters fly, meaning some people are going to get hurt when this is done. Alright, and then in particular associated with Stalin is the purges. The purges is getting rid of any people who opposed him or tried to stop him, or he didn't trust him. Since he had paranoia, there was a ton of people. So this is a really dark period in Russian history, and this is where they get the behind the Iron Curtain type of mystery and stuff like that. There are people going to die. In typical format, people would be accused of something and then be forced to make a confession to the point, where they're tortured, and finally when they do give a confession, there's a show trial, and they're immediately punished so that nothing else can happen. Massive scope, 8 million citizens enlisted in labor camps in 1939, and they're all reported as being wreckers or saboteurs. And final thing is the Gulag. This is a place